for the class. And cleansing of the soul, which is the goal and outcome of Teshuva. So, and that's going to be the emphasis. All we spoke about till now was the outcome of Teshuva is the atonement that you bring about, or the cleansing that happens to your soul. But now we turn to the issue of Teshuva itself, the process of repentance. And that's really what we want to focus on in this book. Let us first define the mitzvah commandment of Teshuva from the Torah. And that line itself is pretty complicated, because the mitzvah of Teshuva, you don't even see in the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. So we'll have to understand it. And that's where he's going to spend some time. Oh, and Adrian's waiting to come in. And that's where he's going to spend some time on the next few pages going through it. So it seems intimidating, meaning there's a lot of text to get through on this page without any Hebrew. But we'll do it together, and we'll do it slowly. The Tanya classifies Teshuva as a mitzvah from the Torah. This definition is challenging to understand both textually and rationally. So the next two paragraphs he's going to talk about textually. Textually, there's a problem since Rambam, which is Maimonides, omits any mention of tshuva from the exhaustive list of the 613 mitzvahs in his book of commandments. He merely states that we are commanded to confess our sins that we have done before God and verbalize them when we do teshuva. A careful reading of this line suggests that only the verbal confession, or in Hebrew it's called vidui, of sin is an actual mitzvah, whereas the tshuva itself is not. So just to pause there for a second, many of you are familiar on Yom Kippur, 5 different rounds on Yom Kippur. We take our fist, tap it gently in our chest, and we do what's in Hebrew known as al-chet, which means for the sin that we have committed. And we have to verbalize it, because that's based on the Rambam. The mitzvah of Teshuva, or he says, is verbalizing the sins, or in English, it would be confessing the sins. That's going to be an essential part of Teshuva. Now, if you look at the words of the Rambam, and I just want to pull up the words again, we are commanded to confess our sins and verbalize them when we do Teshuva. So it almost seems that Teshuva itself is actually not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is actually the verbalization of the sins we committed. And I do want to stop here that confession, even though, it's talking from here, it sounds like a very Jewish idea, it's not. Meaning a person who sins, altogether, we say it in synagogue, and we say even sins that we didn't commit in order that everyone feels comfortable saying all of them. But it's not a concept to go to the rabbi, as it would be in churches to go to the priest and tell the rabbi your sin. It's actually not a thing. You're supposed to really do it for yourself. You're supposed to verbalize them to yourself so that you own it and you're able to heal from it. But it's not an idea to just share your dirty laundry to the world. I'm pretty sure, I'm pretty sure. It's confession, the way we understand it from other religions, is not a Jewish thing at all. But we'll see more, about it here. So Minchas Chinuch, which is a commentary, explaining each of the 613 mitzvahs, compares this to the law of a get, which is a bill of divorce. It is certainly not a mitzvah to divorce one's spouse, but if one chooses to do so, one must write a get. Similarly, Minchas Chinuch argues it is not a mitzvah to do teshuva, according to Rambam, but if one does so, sins must be confessed verbally. So I just want to explain this. This is quite fascinating. There's a mitzvah in the Torah to get divorced. It's actually a mitzvah. It's one of the 613 mitzvahs. But it's not a mitzvah that we have to strive to do. There's a mitzvah to give charity that we have to strive to do. The mitzvah of divorce is only in a place where the relationship is going sour and it's not healthy anymore, and there's no repair possible. And then if they're going to get divorced, there's a mitzvah to get divorced based on the Torah, which is to write a get, which is the bill of divorce. So similar over here, there is no, let me just read that word again. It is, according to the Rambam, it is not a mitzvah to do tshuva. But if one does tshuva, the mitzvah is to verbalize it and verbalize the sins. Does that make sense? So we're getting into the nitty gritty. Is teshuva a mitzvah in the Torah. The Alter Rebbe, which we started with, and we're obviously going to get back to, says that it is a mitzvah in the Torah. If you look at the Rambam, it almost seems that it's not a mitzvah in the Torah, which is okay. There could be differences of opinion. But when the Rambam famously lists out all 613 mitzvahs, the mitzvah of Teshuva is not among them. The mitzvah of confessing when you do Teshuva is among them. To verbalize the sins when you are doing Teshuva is a mitzvah, but the mitzvah of Teshuva itself is not. So it's almost like getting divorced with a bill of with a get. That's the mitzvah. So it's not a mitzvah to get divorced, because most of us hope to not fulfill that mitzvah. But the mitzvah is that if a person is getting divorced, to do it with a get, which is a bill of divorce, that is the mitzvah. Okay, I hope that was clear. That's how the commentary on the Rambam, the Minchas Chinuch, explains it. So back to the point there, textually, if you look at the Rambam, it almost seems that the Teshuva itself is not a mitzvah. The mitzvah is that when a person is doing Teshuva, to do it verbally. Anyway, we'll continue. Rationally speaking, the position that Teshuva is not a mitzvah seems to make more sense. For example, imagine that you had offended one of your coworkers and your employer instructed you to apologize. The apology would probably lack sincerity because you had been commanded to do it by an authority. A true apology must come from within without any coercive force. So the idea rationally of saying that Teshuva is a mitzvah takes away from the spirit of what Teshuva stands for. Teshuva stands for sincerely regretting in your heart. If a person is commanded to do it, it takes away from the sincerity. So rationally speaking, to say that Teshuva is a mitzvah almost doesn't sit right, which I like this concept.
But
So
we're commanded to be in awe of Hashem and to love Hashem. That's a command.
So you're saying that would be part and parcel of Teshuva, right?
No, I'm saying that that's not any harder than to.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So actually, that's a very famous, just to elaborate on Robin's incredible question, which is the commandment to love God, which we say every morning, V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, in the Shema, we say you shall love God, almost seems to take away what love is all about. Love is a passion. It's not a commandment. Love is in the heart. It's not something you could force. So Robin, that question is incredible. And it's asked by many commentaries, and the Chassidus, which is the main one that I think is the most relevant and appropriate for us, our discussion, is you're absolutely right. The commandment is not to love God. The commandment is to meditate on God. That will automatically develop a love in your heart. So in the verse that you and I just quoted, which is from Deuteronomy 6:5, which is you shall love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. The verse right before it, which is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, says, "Hear, O Israel, God is the Lord, God is one." If you meditate on the oneness of God, it will develop a love in your heart. So, we even cover our eyes when we say the Shema, that one verse, so that we should be able to meditate without any distractions on the oneness of God. And if you meditate on that, then you shall love God, meaning it's a promise almost that the love will come when you have that meditation in your heart. So the commandment, according to Chassidus, is not that you shall love God, is that you should meditate about God so that it will develop a love in your heart. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So, but over here, I think maybe that's where, I don't know where he's going to get to yet, but rationally, similar to your question about love and awe, it doesn't make sense to command someone to apologize. Even when, God forbid, if my kids are getting in a fight, which thank God we have 3 boys, and the little one, he's only 1.5, the little boy, but he's still managing to be part of the boy fights. The beauty is if one, gets in trouble with the other, I'll ask them to apologize to each other. And it could sometimes be such an unsincere, no, what's the word? a non-sincere, insincere,
Insincere.
thank you, an insincere apology, because I'm telling them, apologize now. It's so not, it's like not sincere. So, to make it more sincere, I say you have to look at each other in the eyes. Then you have to hug each other. You're trying to force the sincerity coming through, but it's not sincere because you're forcing them to apologize. So how could, rationally, how could teshuva be a mitzvah is this question. And the Alter Rebbe says clearly that it is a mitzvah. So that's where we're stuck, where we're trying to understand. So back to the text. So for tshuva to be real, surely it cannot be a commandment. This would also seem to be the case from a spiritual perspective. As we have learned above, the 630 commandments each form a connection with God, which is severed by sin. Let me just, below the Tanya, I'm just turning the page, we'll compare this to a rope of 613 strands. How does teshuva repair that damage? I guess it's a quick question. How does teshuva repair that damage? Because each mitzvah represents a particular connection with God. Teshuva, on the other hand, represents your general connection that transcends those particulars. So I love this line. I just want to explain it. We look at our connection with God through the mitzvahs. And it's just like there's 613 mitzvahs. We look at our connection and relationship with God to be a rope that is comprised of 613 strands. Each mitzvah we do strengthens one of those strands. Each sin we do severs one of those 613 strands. And obviously, the more sins that is taking place, the weaker the connection, because the more strands are being severed. What we know about teshuva is that it repairs it. So his question here is, teshuva can't be a mitzvah like one of the 613 strands. Teshuva is the general idea to repair the damage that is done. So teshuva can't be one of the 613 strands like charity and like stealing, because each of those is a strand that has to be repaired through teshuva. So teshuva is more of a general idea, not a strand of the 613. So he's bringing all the proofs to tell us that teshuva can't be a mitzvah. To put it in other words, the connection through mitzvahs is bounded and limited by the laws that define it. But teshuva is unbounded and unlimited. You can always do teshuva however far you have strayed. And if that's the case, teshuva can't be a mitzvah, because a mitzvah is limited. Let me just explain it a little more. For example, if you were to eat matzah on Sukkot, you don't get a mitzvah for eating matzah. The mitzvah of matzah is limited to the night of Passover. The mitzvah of shofar is limited to the day of Rosh Hashanah. If you listen to the shofar on the night of Rosh Hashanah, you don't get the mitzvah, because the mitzvah says Yom Teruah. It's a day of blasting. So it has to be done during the day. So therefore, there's very limited definitions to the mitzvah. And 1 second, Shira. So therefore, teshuva has to be a repair of that, which is unlimited to the confines of a mitzvah. Just to explain, there's an incredible medrash. I don't know, I'm not going to get the exact quote, but they asked if a person sins, it's a famous quote in the midrash about teshuva. I don't remember all the details, but they asked the Torah, what should happen to a person who sins? So the Torah would say, if you were to ask the Torah says they should be punished, because in the Torah there's punishments. If a person sins, depending on what it is, the Torah says if a person robs, they have to pay back double. If a person swears falsely and gives a false testimony in court, there's a punishment for that. It's whatever the punishment is. And they ask the angels, what should be with a person who sins? And the angels give a response. And then they ask God, what should be with a person who sins? And God's response is, let him do teshuva and he will be forgiven. And what we learned from this is, if you were to ask the Torah is confined to the mitzvahs. And therefore, if you sever a mitzvah, there's repercussions. Angels, they look at things from their limited standpoint. Only if you were to go directly to God, and if you remember the verse we quoted last week from Leviticus, from the laws of Yom Kippur in the Torah, it says it's in front of Havaya, which means you have to go from a place that's even higher than God's name where Teshuva takes place. So a mitzvah would be just part of the Torah. Teshuva, we're saying, has to be overriding the Torah in order to forgive, in order to repair, in order to heal. Um, I want to explain it with other words. I've been dealing with a few people that have been coming to me with grief. They, God forbid, someone lost a child, and it's coming with a heavy price on them, even though it was a few years ago. And we hope that time heals, but it's not healing for this person. So what's fascinating is if a person is going through a terrible time, whether in their relationship or whether in personally in their inner space or globally is struck from so much that's going on in the world, it's not enough just to say, just move on and continue tomorrow as if nothing happened. Because it's so strong in you, you have to dig into yourself to a deeper place to be able to have the strength to overcome. So you can't just move on and ignore it. There's something that you have to delve in deeper. When a person sins, Teshuva is delving into yourself to a deeper place that could heal the sin. And to do that, what we're saying in the text is that can't just be a surface mitzvah. It has to be something deeper than a mitzvah and not just the mitzvah of the Torah. So when the Alter Rebbe says that Teshuva is a mitzvah, that's where we're having a little bit of a trouble understanding it. And yes, Shira.
You answered my question. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Okay, cool. Any other questions before we continue? Okay. I know I'm kind of taking my time going through this text. It's just, I find it a fascinating idea, understanding, where Teshuva stands in the Torah. And then we'll see the concept of Teshuva, in the book, but I found this pretty fascinating. I think we're up to the third paragraph in the Kindle. So if Teshuva would indeed be a mitzvah, how could it do its job? Teshuva has to transcend the commander, the subject relationship, to provide the opportunity for a genuine remorse, and B, a spiritual healing power that is greater than any particular mitzvah. Nevertheless, the Tanya is unequivocal that Teshuva is a mitzvah from the Torah. So therefore the question is, how are we to understand this position? The author of the Tanya would answer, both are true. Teshuva transcends the particular trappings of a mitzvah, but it is also a mitzvah. Everything we have argued above is correct. Teshuva is indeed higher than a mitzvah. But the Tanya chose specifically to stress the other side of the coin, that of Teshuva as mitzvah, that of Teshuva as a mitzvah, to give the reader a certain particular direction and emphasis. To understand why this is the case, we need to probe the position of Teshuva as mitzvah more deeply. Okay, so just to summarize, what the Tanya is, what we're trying to stress over here is that Teshuva transcends a mitzvah, but that's only one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin, Teshuva is also a mitzvah in the Torah. And it seems like the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, is stressing that part of the coin more, that Teshuva is a mitzvah. And why is the Alter Rebbe wanting to stress that? We're about to find out. We need to clarify. Number one, if Teshuva is the mitzvah, why was it omitted by the Rambam in his codification of the mitzvahs? Number two, rationally and spiritually speaking, if Teshuva must transcend the commander-subject relationship, how do we understand Teshuva as a limited mitzvah? So the following could be argued. So over here, we're going to kind of have to keep our mind focused, and we'll try to summarize it. And if you have any analysis or understanding on these following answers, I would love to hear. Number one, Rambam viewed the mitzvah of Teshuva, Rambam is Maimonides, and he views the mitzvah of Teshuva in a very similar way to how he perceived the mitzvah of prayer. Prayer has two components. A, the mental, emotional experience. In Hebrew, we know it as kavanah, which we've talked extensively about previously. And B, the verbalization of prayer. Obviously, the mental, emotional component is more important, for that is what prayer really is. It's in the heart. It's the deeper connection that we're building. Nevertheless, when codifying the mitzvah from the point of view of Jewish law, Rambam emphasizes verbalization. Apparently, Rambam maintained that when a commandment has two components, one mental, emotional, and the other verbal, Jewish law must stress the latter, which is the verbal. But that does not mean to say that the former is less important. In fact, the opposite is true. A similar scenario exists in the case of the mitzvah of Torah study. The main component is the comprehension, but Jewish law emphasizes the verbalization. Similarly, in the case of Teshuva, though Rambam, Maimonides, stresses the verbal component of confession, he certainly deemed its mental emotional component, which is the tshuva itself, to be the more important component. So just to summarize this, the author of this text, Rabbi Chaim Miller, he gives other examples to prove the point. The answer we're giving is that even the Rambam, who says that the mitzvah of teshuva is not in the Torah, the mitzvah is actually only that when you are doing teshuva, you should verbalize it. What we're saying is that the Rambam himself would agree that the real part of teshuva is not the verbalization. That's necessary part, but the deeper part, which is the sincerity, the heart, the regret, the remorse, what's going on inside you, is actually the more important part. It's just that when there's a rule in the Torah that whenever there's a component of the mitzvah that is mental and emotional, and there's another component that is verbal, the Torah stresses the verbal part, which I think makes sense because whenever there's a practical aspect, that's the one that has to be stressed. So he gives the example of Torah study and of prayer. Prayer has the kavanah, which is actually more important, meaning what's the feeling of the person during their prayer. And then there's the verbalization, the words of the prayer that has to be recited.
The action.
It's the action, exactly. And if you look in the Rambam, the part of prayer that is more emphasized is the verbalization, the action of the prayer. Even though the kavanah is more important. But the rule is that whenever you have a verbal part or an action part, that's going to be emphasized more, even though the other part could be more important. The same is with Torah study. All of us would agree that Torah study is mainly in the mind. You have to understand what you're studying. And yet the Rambam, when he introduces Torah study, he says you have to verbalize it. And that's the mitzvah, is to study. I have to actually look at the text of the Rambam there, but it seems like that the mitzvah is to study with your mouth. I have to actually review that again. I think that's the words we said. The main component is the comprehension, but Jewish law emphasizes the verbalization. Yeah, I guess so. I guess the main part is the study, is the comprehension, but yet Jewish law emphasizes the verbalization, which is surprising, but it seems like that's the case. So anyway, the same is with Teshuva, that even though the Rambam stresses the verbal part of Teshuva, the true important part is actually the Teshuva itself, which is the sincerity and the remorse and the letting go of the sin, which is in the heart. So does everyone understand this part so far? Does anyone have any questions on it? Okay, so again, just to make sure we're all on the same page, is what we're trying to answer over here, and it seems like maybe a side point, but I find it to be fascinating, therefore we're reading it, is that the Alter Rebbe makes it clear that the mitzvah of Teshuva is in the Torah. If you look at the Rambam, so both textually in the Rambam and Jewish law, and rationally, it doesn't make sense for Teshuva to be a mitzvah. It doesn't make sense, because the Rambam says that the mitzvah is to verbalize the sin with your mouth when you are doing Teshuva. So it almost seems like Teshuva itself is not the mitzvah. It's just that when you're doing Teshuva, you should verbalize it. Like, it's not a mitzvah to get divorced, but if a person is getting divorced, it has to be done. The mitzvah is to be done with a get, which is the bill of divorce. And rationally, it doesn't make sense to be forced into doing the teshuva, because it takes away from the essence of teshuva. So the answer is that to answer from the Rambam, and we're going to go to, I think, the rational part in a second. Even the Rambam, who seems to say that the mitzvah is the verbal part, it's not taking away from the importance of the teshuva itself. It's just that the rule in the Torah is that whenever there's a verbal part to a mitzvah, that's the one that's going to be emphasized. Similar to prayer and similar to Torah study, no one would say that the kavanah of prayer is not important or the comprehension of Torah study is not important. Of course, those are, and that's actually the most important. But since there's a verbal part, the Rambam lists those parts as the mitzvah. Okay, so that's one perspective. And let's take Naomi, go ahead. And just unmute yourself first. Yeah.
So I think a page a little while ago I read that and you said also Teshuva is a mitzvah in the Torah. Yeah. And I think somewhere they gave the place in the Torah, but can you tell us what it says in the Torah about Teshuva being a mitzvah?
So very good. It says very good. So I don't know if Lynn is able to listen. In Deuteronomy, it says the words "V'shav ad Hashem Elokecha," that you shall return all the way to God your God. It says that in the Torah, but the Rambam understands it to be a verbal part. That when you're doing teshuvah, it has to be verbal. Let me go back in the text. My book still did not arrive. So I can't just quickly turn back a page. Really? Oh no. Oh, it's fine. It's fine, Sharon. I just want to see over here. He doesn't bring a source when he brings it into Hebrew. Usually he brings a source, right? He doesn't bring a source here. If you give me a moment, let me just look it up in the Rambam. Hold on 1 second. I'm just pulling up the Rambam. It's a very good question, Naomi, and I feel like I should have addressed it already. So I'm just going to pull up the Rambam in the source, and let's see what he says. So this is literally the opening words of the Rambam of Teshuva. He says, oh, so he actually brings a different verse. The Rambam actually stresses the verse about confession, where he says, a man or woman that have sinned, that have committed a sin, and they shall confess their sin that they did. And that's the verse. It doesn't bring a source here, but I'm pretty sure that's from Leviticus. I'm just gonna, I would love for you guys to see it also. So I'm just gonna pull up, if you allow me, I'm just gonna pull up the actual text on the screen. And Shira, I'm gonna read it out loud so you could, be part of it also, of course. Mishnah Torah. Here we go. Tell me if you could see my screen in 3, 2, 1. Yes. Are you able to see the screen? Perfect. So this is literally the Rambam, which I suggest for everyone to study a little bit of Rambam. It's incredible. So the Rambam literally I'm just going to read it in the English. The mitzvah and the fundamental principle of faith that follow in relation to explaining. Okay, so it goes like this. If a person transgresses any of the mitzvot of the Torah, whether a positive command or a negative command, whether willingly or inadvertently, look at the words. When he repents, so it almost seems like the repentance itself is not the mitzvah. It just says that when he is repenting and returns from his sin, he must confess before God, blessed be he. As Numbers states, if a man or a woman commit any of the sins of man, they must confess the sin that they committed. This refers to a verbal confession. This confession is a positive command. So the Rambam makes it very clear from Book of Numbers that the mitzvah is confession. And the Alter Rebbe is saying that the mitzvah is Teshuva. And what we're answering now, and we didn't even get into the text of the Alter Rebbe yet, it's just really the author taking the liberty of explaining the background, that the Alter Rebbe, the author Rabbi Chaim Miller, is saying that it's not a contradiction. Of course, the Rambam would say that the mitzvah in the heart of Teshuva, the soul of Teshuva, which is the essence of the remorse and the letting go of the sin, is the main focus of Teshuva. It's just that whenever you have a verbal component, that's going to be emphasized, and that's going to be the actual mitzvah, similar to prayer and similar to Torah study. Thank you, Naomi, for having us bring that up. So anyway, to answer your question, according to the Rambam, it's from Numbers. I think I said Leviticus, but the verse is from Numbers, Book of Numbers.
Rabbi, isn't maybe Rambam emphasizing the saying of confession, or recognizing our sin and talking to God, because as you've said to us previously, we're people of action, and that is action, although it's not action the same as giving charity, but that it's the action, and it does not negate the kavanah, the intention, the sincerity, but that
exactly
Jewish law is saying you've got to get into
action base.
Exactly. You can't just think about this, you guys. You think, but you act.
Yeah, it has. Interesting. Itzik came, someone dear to us in our community. He was telling me, and there's a famous quote from the previous Rebbe, that our Rebbe put it in Hayom Yom, that wherever you go, you should say words of Torah, and by saying words of Torah wherever you go, you're purifying the air. You purify the air of where you are. And it's a very famous quote. And, even as a young child, we're always studying Torah, not only in the book, we're also learning how to study it by heart, so that when we go to a place that doesn't have book and we can't study, we could still do it by heart and verbalize it wherever we are. And by doing that, you're bringing it to the world. And, in that quote from the Rebbe, it says that so that when you're in the subway or when you're on the streets, you're purifying the air in that place. So just yesterday, Itzik was telling me that what it means is, he was saying that when you I don't know if he meant it scientifically or not, but the air absorbs the words you are sharing. It brings it into the atmosphere. It brings it into the oxygen is absorbing your words, your breath. So therefore, it's actually taking your Torah and it's putting it into the air and the oxygen of the world. So that's how it purifies the area around you. I just found it interesting, because that's really our job. So I guess, Nancy, like you're saying, the mitzvah is to verbalize it, because we're action based. We're doing that's the mitzvah. Yeah, I agree. But the Alter Rebbe seems to still be saying that the mitzvah is the actual feeling in the heart, I think, but we'll have to read further. Okay, so we're up to number 2, I think, at the bottom.
I was also going to say, and I can't find it, but it's where let the words of my mouth and meditation of my heart be acceptable. And so that we have to say words, which is interesting. But I did find in Psalm 51, it said, open my mouth that I may declare thy praise. And it goes on from there. The sacrifices, spirit, awesome. A broken heart, oh God, thou will not despise. So it's like our words are important for praise, but also for a clean heart to verbalize, which I think is so
beautiful. Beautiful. It has to be the clean heart. So the first verse is from Tehillim, from the book of Psalms, the last verse of chapter 19, which is a very powerful one. And the second one we say before every Amidah, right? Mm-hmm. Open my lips and my mouth shall utter your praise. Very good. Thank you, Lynn. Awesome. And in this, there's a lot to discuss about that clean heart. In chapter 24, I think, of Tehillim, it says, "Who will enter Gan Eden?" It says the clean of heart, the ki kapayim, the clean hands, and the pure heart. And a lot of us are intimidated from that, because if we are action-based, our Beinani, their heart is not clean. Their action is clean. And we've learned that over and over again about a Beinani, that in their mind, they still have temptations. In their heart, it's still raging. But in their action, in their speech, and even what they're allowing themselves to think about, they struggle and they push it away, and they remain faithful. They remain strong. The idea of a clean heart, that's, we'll have to get more about what Teshuva is, but one of the most famous examples of this is if anyone heard in the Haggadah, this is usually when people are still awake at the Seder. We talk about Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, and he says, "I'm like 70 years old." On that day, he was actually just 18, but he became the leader of the Jewish people. Before him, there was a great leader whose name was Rabbi Gamliel, and Rabbi Gamliel, who was the elder and leader of the Jewish people in Israel at the time, he was very strict, and he put a lot of rules in place that made it it made it difficult and almost impossible for the masses, for the majority of the Jews to participate. He said that the only people allowed into the Torah study is people that their inside is as pure as their outside. Meaning, it's not enough that they're wearing the religious garb. It's what's going on in their hearts. That's the most important. And because of it, most people weren't accepted in, because their heart weren't pure as they would have wished it should be. So most people weren't able to study. So eventually they saw a lot of people weren't coming, so they actually fired him, meaning this great leader, Rabbi Gamliel, that was literally at the top. They fired him from his position because he was too strict, and they put Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah on top, and he said, let everyone come. Because if they come, then we will work on their hearts, meaning they have to be here in order for them to work on themselves. So, back to the idea of Teshuva, it's the same thing. Like Lynn, like you're saying, the clean heart. It's for sure in the heart, and it has to. Where does it start from? Does it start on the lips and then it goes into the heart, or is it supposed to start in the heart and then go to the lips? And I think that's part of the discussion we're having. I think from the Rambam, it almost seems like it has to be verbalized, because when you verbalize something, it'll then go to the heart. You have to bring it into action. And when you anchor it with something real in the energy, in the atmosphere, in the verbalization, it can make it real. Like, even in a marriage, gifts is not the essence of a marriage. But when you're doing acts of kindness and compliments, verbalizing, it will bring the heart into it also. I think the expression in the Torah, in the Talmud somewhere, is after the mouth, the heart is drawn, meaning you have to express things, and then you get the heart motivated into it. There's obviously a lot that's coming up. I want to try to stay more to the text than my own thoughts on it. But yes, Naomi. Oh, you're muted, so just unmute yourself first.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is later in the book that we're learning from. But I recall, I think it's on Yom Kippur, we say that for sins against God, Yom Kippur atones, but against people, we have to do something like Shuva to people. I guess that means verbalizing what we're sorry that we did, and having an intent to do it differently next time.
Interesting, exactly. And even when we're going to other people, there's such interesting discussions that only really come up in the contemporary, like more in our modern times. Like we have a dear friend that's in the hospital. So there's I went to visit him, Ken Klein, such a lovely guy. And thank God he's home now. But, do you fulfill the mitzvah of visiting the sick by making a phone call? Or could you do teshuva through a text? Is that considered verbalizing? If you ask someone, say I'm sorry, is it counted by doing it on a text message or a Facebook, a Facebook Messenger? Is that considered teshuva or not? Meaning you could be sincere in your heart, but are you verbalizing it? I don't know. Is that considered verbalizing it or not?
It's still an action.
Is it an action, right? So, texting. So there's a lot that that goes into these ideas, but I like that concept, Naomi, of having to go to the other person. But let's continue a little bit more inside. So number 2, teshuva. So again, the 2 parts over here is there's teshuva that is beyond a regular mitzvah, but then there's the teshuva as mitzvah part. And what we're saying is that they're not contradictory to each other; both are important. And number 2 is saying teshuva as mitzvah is not an alternative position to teshuva transcends mitzvahs. It is a second phase. So I guess the second perspective is there's two phases. There's teshuva that is transcending of a mitzvah, but then you actually have to make the tshuva as a mitzvah. Let's see what that means. For tshuva to be real, it must be totally autonomous and not coerced in any way by divine command. As a first phase, teshuva must transcend the status of mitzvah and be an act of human agency alone, which means that it's not coerced, it's totally coming from you. The Tanya emphasizes here that teshuva is also a mitzvah to teach us that there must be a second phase. Teshuva is a necessary rupture from the past, a retreat from one's former lifestyle, but it must be followed by a re-entry into normative observance. When, for example, Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya did such a profound teshuva that his soul expired and he died, that second phase was lacking. The fact that teshuva is a mitzvah sends us the message that its purpose is not merely to the escape and retreat from the past, but to be forwardly oriented, invigorating all subsequent mitzvah observance. And that's such a beautiful way of learning. I love this perspective. So I just want to pause there and explain and take any questions on it. But this way of, so let's just give a little bit of a summary. The Alter Rebbe, the text that the only 4 Hebrew words we said so far in the Tanya today is that the mitzvah of the Torah of Teshuva is. So on that itself, the translator here says, wait a minute, there's no mitzvah of Teshuva. According to the Rambam, the mitzvah is the verbalization when you are doing Teshuva. So the perspective we're giving here is there's 2 parts to the mitzvah of Teshuva. There's a part of Teshuva that transcends any mitzvah. It's beyond a mitzvah, and that's coming from the deeper part of the heart. But then there's the part of Teshuva that is a mitzvah, which is verbalizing it. And what we're understanding here is that it's phase 1 and phase 2. The first phase of Teshuva can't be coerced, it can't be forced, it can't be commanded. And that's the part of Teshuva that is coming from within us. But that's not enough. You have to then kick it into the second gear and transition to the second phase of Teshuva, which is inspiring the other mitzvahs of the Torah to come forth. So in this commentary, he just gave the example from the Talmud, one of the famous stories that if you've been around, you've heard me share the story before, of Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya. Elazar ben Dordaya was the biggest sinner in Jewish history, but for sure in his generation, where if there was any sin, he made sure to commit it. Like it was his passion to try to fulfill every single possible sin available. And he would go to different places where there were women and he would commit sins with them. And it says that he heard of one woman on the top of a certain mountain and she charged a certain amount and he brought them money and he was ready to have a relationship with her that was forbidden. And she heard of him from her friends and from the other people, and she blew a breath of air. And she said, just like this breath of air, I can never retrieve, the soul of Elazar ben Dordaya can never be accepted back in the heavens. Based on, the amount of sins that you did, you're never, going to heaven. And it stirred him so much. And the Talmud goes through the details of his cries. Eventually, his soul expired from the deep cry of realizing just how far he came. And it says that a heavenly voice came forward. I didn't hear it, you didn't hear it, but a great rabbi, his name was Rebbe, the author of the Mishnah, he heard it, and he heard a voice that says, the soul of Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya was accepted to the heavens. And it referred to him as Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya, even though he never got smicha, which means he was never ordained or did anything, but his tshuva was so strong that he was automatically considered to be on the highest status, which is an incredible story. And Rebbe cried, and he said there are those that spend their lifetime trying to attain a good portion in the world to come. And then there are those, referring to this person that just passed away, Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya, who in a single moment is able to take all of it, meaning he's able to acquire all of it in a single moment of true teshuva. So that's the gist of that story. But what he's saying here is even Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya, all he got was the first phase of the Teshuva, the deep, sincere remorse to the point where his soul expired and he was accepted, and etc. But the second phase of Teshuva, which is that it should orient you, it should give you a passion to do other mitzvahs, that he was lacking. And that's part of the two phases that we're talking about here. Let me make sure that's how you understood it as well. I'm just going to bring the text back up. Right, so this person, Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya, his soul expired, the second phase was lacking. So tshuva is a mitzvah. It's tell us that we can't just escape the past. We have to be forward oriented. I love that idea. In Hebrew, there's an expression, and for the people that have been to Israel, you may have heard an Israeli yell at you when you were taking too long to ask for questions or whatever. The Israeli way of saying it is kadima, yalla. Just you have to go forward. Kadima means, I don't know, I'll let Lynn translate that better, but it's move forward. So if Teshuva is all about the past, which is what Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya was crying about, that's the Teshuva as transcending a mitzvah. But Teshuva as a mitzvah, which is the second phase, is that it should be forward oriented. Okay. Okay, so finally, now we're getting to more of the text of the Alter Rebbe. So the mitzvah of Teshuva from the Torah is just the decision to stop sinning. So in Hebrew, those are four very powerful words. It's aziva tachet belvad. The mitzvah of Teshuva is just the decision to stop sinning. As Rambam writes, what is Teshuva? So this is from chapter 2 of the Rambam, so I didn't quote this yet, that the sinner stops the sin, removing it from his thoughts, deciding in his heart not to do it again. While Rambam does not state which verse from the Torah this mitzvah is derived. Oh, Naomi, this is going to your question from before. The Rambam does not, this is in chapter 1, the Rambam does describe the source of confession, which is the mitzvah according to the Rambam. But in chapter 2, he doesn't say the source of where, the Rambam takes it from, that you should make the decision to stop sinning. But he suggests it over here in the English. The source would appear to be, and that's what I was telling you. You shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart, v'shav, and nor shall you show a stiff neck anymore. The stress that negative behavior, such as sin, should not persist anymore implies that it has occurred already. Let me just say that again. The stress that negative behavior, such as sin, should not persist anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's already occurred.
So meaning you're the stress in the Rambam, in this text over here, which is deciding in the heart not to do it again. So it seems like from there that the negative behavior occurred and it should not persist anymore. Implies that it has occurred already. And the prescribed solution is you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart. Decide not to do it again. So that's where you're learning from this, the circumcising of your heart, which means remove the foreskin, let's say being that layer of sin, and you have to remove that.
Is it okay
Sure.
to mention that it's in two places in the Torah? The place where you mentioned in Numbers before, and the first place is you should confess, and then in the second place, it's about not doing it again or resolving to not do it again.
Right, but the reason what's interesting is the Rambam doesn't list it when the Rambam describes the process of Teshuva, he doesn't give a verse because according to the Rambam, it's not a biblical mitzvah of Teshuva. The biblical mitzvah is confession, so he brings a verse for that from Numbers, but he doesn't bring a verse from Deuteronomy, even though that's the gist of it, which is what is Teshuva? That the sinner stops the sin, removing it from his thoughts. And you're right. The verse is from, you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart. Very well said, Naomi. So the Tanya's emphasis Teshuva is just to is surprising, as it seems to exclude other activities which are traditionally deemed to be part of the Teshuva process, such as remorse, confession, and asking God for forgiveness. You could see more about the process in the duties of the heart. The Tanya does not wish to imply that these are not Teshuva related activities. Rather, its message is that they are not the essence of Teshuva. If you simply decide to stop sinning and do nothing more, you have done Teshuva from the Torah. I just want to pause there for a second. All of this is very powerful. So again, part of the process of Teshuva is remorse and confession and asking God for forgiveness. But the essence of Teshuva is the simple decision to not do it again. The simple decision to stop sinning, to let go of it. And that takes a moment. That's a moment of sincere inner strength to decide not to do it. Now, we know that if a person just relies on their decision, chances are, right, how many times does an alcoholic or a smoker decide to stop smoking or drinking until the next drink? So, obviously we're talking about a sincere feeling. And if I'm not mistaken, unfortunately, I've officiated a lot more funerals than I have at weddings. But if I'm not, I don't know if it's a custom or it's a law, but under the chuppah, we know that when a Jewish bride and a Jewish groom get married, there has to be two kosher witnesses that officially are there to witness the marriage, the handing of the ksuba from the husband to the wife, the putting of the ring, and the verbalization that the groom does under the chuppah. And they have to, look at the ring, make sure it's worth something. It's an interesting process. I've loved, seeing it from up close. But there's a custom so the law is that the witnesses have to be kosher. For witnesses to be kosher, they can't be related to each other. They can't be related to either the bride or the groom. And also it says that they have to be authentic, sincere people, which means they can't be sinners. Now, which it says there isn't a person that lived that didn't sin. So if we want to be sincere, authentic people, for example, it says a gambler can be a kosher witness. And it was so interesting. My kids are into this, not that they're into gambling, but the law is that if a person gambles just as a curiosity, that's not considered a gambler. A gambler has to be someone who does it as a profession, does it as a business, does it as not only an addiction. I don't know if it's they do it almost like as a way to make money. A lot of people, I think Adina's grandmother would go to the casino just as an experience for fun. It wasn't like she wasn't planning to, burn her mortgage by gambling. But a few weeks ago for Friday night dinner, we had someone who proudly says, I'm a gambler. And my kids were like, I don't know if the word is excited, but they haven't met a professional gambler that wouldn't be a kosher witness. So now they finally met one, that they studied about in Jewish law, that it has to be a professional gambler. So they felt like now we know someone that's not a kosher witness at court. So they were excited, which was cute. But anyway, back to a wedding, it says that for the witnesses, they should be tzaddikim. They shouldn't be sinners because they want to be authentic kosher witnesses. So it says just, when they're getting called up to the chuppah, from their seat to say, we honor so-and-so with being the witness, on that walk, they should do teshuva in their heart so that they could be as kosher as possible to be a witness at the wedding. So it didn't come with a whole background of read a bunch of Torah and go do a bunch of confession. It's the feeling of the heart from their seat to the chuppah that allows them to be fully have done teshuva. So obviously it's a lifelong process, but it's that moment, like the story of Elazar ben Dordaya, it was that moment of sincere heart remorse and simply letting go of the sin that is the true essence of teshuva. So of course, part of that process is remorse and regret and apologies, whether to God or, like Naomi said, to the person who you sinned against. But the essence of teshuva is the commitment in your heart to let go. And that's what the Alter Rebbe wants to make clear here. And I think he's going to continue on, to explain that further. So the Tanya does not wish to imply that these are not Teshuva-related activities. Rather, its message is that they are not the essence of Teshuva. If you simply decide to stop sinning and do nothing more, you have done Teshuva from the Torah. Wow. Okay. It looks like we're already over time. So I think we'll stop here. I just want to, let me just read a little more, just because I like the next paragraph coming up. What then is the role of remorse, confession, and asking for forgiveness? And why are these activities not deemed to be the essence of Teshuva? So just the next paragraph, I find it to be very powerful. The mitzvah of Teshuva from the Torah is forward-looking. It is just a decision to stop sinning in the future, which I thought it's, Teshuva is on the past sin, but it's letting go of the sin for the future, meaning you're not wallowing in the past. It's a decision to help you in the future, which I find to be such a, you're not living in the past, you're living for the future. It's such a Jewish idea. And not to say it's not another religion idea, but I love, we're so forward thinking. Even Teshuva is forward thinking, which I think is very powerful. Remorse, confession, and requesting forgiveness all relate to the past. You're remorseful about your earlier sinful activity, and you confess to God about it. Then you pray that he will atone and cleanse your soul from what happened in the past. Further proof that atonement is not central to the mitzvah of tshuva is that it is not a guaranteed outcome. God will not necessarily forgive you for your sin, but that does not mean that you have failed in the mitzvah of teshuva, whose essence is just a decision to stop sinning. That last paragraph I just wanted to get to. What we're saying here is a person could do teshuva and fulfill the mitzvah of teshuva even though they're not atoned for their sin. But the mitzvah of teshuva was still done. So for example, if a person sins, it's obviously easier for us to relate with each other. If a person sins against another, they slander another person, God forbid, and they really regret what they did. So part of the mitzvah is like a step in the mitzvah is to go to that person and ask for forgiveness. What happens if the person is not ready to forgive them, is so upset at what they said, they were so embarrassed that understandably so, they're not ready to forgive. So is the person's teshuva not sincere? Is the person's teshuva not a mitzvah because the other person didn't forgive them? So what he's saying here is no, that's two separate things. There's the mitzvah of teshuva that is on the person in the heart to do. And then which is that he commits to not do it again, letting go of the sin. And then there's the atonement from the other person or from God, wherever the sin took place. And that's a separate thing. So even if the atonement is not secured, the mitzvah of teshuva was still fulfilled.
So if they
Powerful.
do something, sorry,
Yeah,
if
go
they
ahead.
do something wrong to someone, they ask for forgiveness 3 times. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And then they don't have to ask anymore.
Sincere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As long as it was in a sincere mode, then absolutely. It's a beautiful ideas. Okay, yeah,
And
go
also
ahead.
for teshuva, if you violate a negative commandment, you can do teshuva, but it's suspended, right? Until
the Yom Kippur. Exactly. Exactly. And that's part of the atonement process. But the teshuva is at that moment. Yeah. So that's I think what the Alter Rebbe wants to emphasize is it's the moment that you're in right now that you're forward thinking. So you're not, regret and remorse is for the past. Letting go of the sin is saying I'm a new person now. That's not who I am anymore, and I won't do that again. It's the commitment to not do it again. So it's again the forward thinking mentality that is the essence of teshuva. So of course, remorse, regret, confession, other parts are going to be a process. But the essence of teshuva is that forward-thinking, sincere commitment that's not who I am anymore. That's not, I'm letting go of it and I'm not doing it. To do that properly, you have to change. And to change, you have to, that's a process. So, and that's but the essence of teshuva is that moment, which I think is very powerful. Okay, everyone, thank you very much. I'm glad we were able to get through that.
Can I say something, please? Just briefly.
Of course, please. Yeah, absolutely.
I have been going to a class with Rabbi Yankee Bill in El Cerrito for a number of years. And one of our participants, a very active member, suddenly died on Sunday. and I was at his funeral yesterday. And so I want to take this opportunity to tell
Absolutely.
everybody that I just so appreciate you, Rabbi, and all of you folks. I love you. I just
you,
love
Robin.
seeing you every Wednesday. This is a very important part of my life. And don't die on me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you,
Thank
Robin.
you,
That's
Robin.
it's an incredibly powerful. May the neshama of your friend have an aliyah. And actually, Rabbi Bell just called me, and I'm assuming it's related to that, so I'm going to call him back. But thank you, Robin. And you're right. The connection we can build with each other through Torah study is such a deep, beautiful connection, and
So
we're
important.
connected in this world and connected in the next world. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Robin, for sharing that.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Rabbi.
All right, bye, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Robin.
Have a great day.
Bye.